morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this historic occasion. We're going to be signing legislation that we believe is going to be significant in our continued efforts to erase anti-Semitism, a journey that everyone in this room cares deeply about. I do want to thank the keepers of the flame in this beautiful building that's been in existence 25 years. For 25 years, this place has been telling the story, the horror of what has happened in our lifetime or the lifetimes of our parents or our grandparents. And I'm so grateful for Elise Buxbaum for her passion that she brings us. She just took me on in some sense, a bone-chilling tour. You cannot walk through these exhibits and not just feel so deeply as a human being what individuals, fellow human beings had to endure. So thank you, Elise, and I promise to come back when I have far more time someday in the future to really experience this. I've been to some of the concentration camps as I toured Europe, and it just never leaves you, the horror. Bruce Bratner, thank you for being on this long journey as well. Your vision to help bring us this gathering space, this museum in the first place as the chairman of the Museum of Jewish Heritage. Cecilia Kenner, we're going to hear from you in a couple minutes, and this is going to be a heck of a story. I know this, and I thank you for being a woman of dignity and a woman who cares so deeply about sharing what happened to you in order to prevent the evil that you witnessed from ever affecting another person. So you're making a real difference in your efforts to go out there as a spokesperson, so thank you. We also have a number of the bill. I know a lot of our elected officials are recognized. In the interest of time, I'm going to acknowledge our bill sponsors. Anna Kaplan, thank you for being a real champion on legislation. I'll be mentioning what you worked on in a couple minutes. Nili Rozek, our Assembly member, thank you. Chuck Levine, another bill sponsor. Zellner Myrie, our senator, bill sponsor. Simcha Eichenstein, I want to thank him for his sponsorship. Also, I want to recognize our Borough President, Mark Levine, is here. Thank you, Mark Levine, and all of our other leaders. But also, we have leaders in Congress. I want to recognize Carolyn Maloney, who sponsored the federal Holocaust education bill. I want to thank her for her work on that. And to Congressman Jerry Nadler for being the informal dean of the Jewish delegation. Both of you have been doing tremendous work, and I thank you for that. What we do at the state level is important, but what you do at the federal level has a national impact, and that is making a profound difference. So I just saw an exhibit. I'm sure you'll all take the time to do this. It's the newest exhibit called What Hate Can Do. What Hate Can Do. And it's sad that we even have to have that conversation in 2022, but I think it's really, really timely that we talk about not just the past, but what is really going on in the present. That's an awakening we've all had to encounter as we see the specter of anti-Semitism on the rise and white supremacy and the radicalization of people, whether it's the chanting in Charlottesville and what happened in my hometown of Buffalo when an individual is radicalized on the internet, to go 3 hours away and shatter the lives of 10 fellow neighbors of mine, Buffalonians, because of the color of their skin. So there is hatred out there, and it's spreading. And that is why we talk about it here in this place, but in this place, it's not enough. This has to be taught in our schools, and we have to make sure that's actually happening. So today we gather here to pay tribute to the 6 million lives that are lost. And when you walk through and you see the faces of people holding babies and celebrating family milestones and doing their jobs, and you know they never survived. They didn't live the normal span of life. It was cut short. And we are obligated to honor, but also to remember, to truly remember that these are not just statistics, they're not names on a wall, they're true human beings. And while it may look different today, that hatred is still out there. It's still out there, and it hasn't gone away. And that's what's so hurtful. It's still targeting Jews across the world, and yes, in our own state, because we've had 570 anti-Semitic crimes perpetrated against Jewish New Yorkers this year. That's not in the last decade, the last 5 years. That is this year alone. And according to the ADL, New York State has led the nation in anti-Semitic incidents in 2021, up 24% from the year before, which is already a high year from the year before. So it's a very large, a very disturbing increase. And meanwhile, we've found that 22% of American Jews are afraid to wear outward signature emblems of their faith and their heritage, their story, because it'll mark them as Jewish and make them a target for a crime. And I know this because I went to a synagogue in Flatbush right after there had been, I went to a synagogue, then a yeshiva, I went to the classroom and talked to a young man who came up to me and said to me, he was about 10 or 12 years old, he said, "Governor, my friend says I shouldn't wear my yarmulke anymore because I'm going to be attacked on the streets. What do you think about that?" I said, no, young man, you wear that. You wear that proudly because that's what your ancestors would want you to do. And we'll protect you. We'll do everything we can in our power as the adults, as elected leaders, and as members of law enforcement and community activists who tell the stories and honor the traditions. You continue to do that so someday your children will understand and their children understand this is how we pass this on. And so, as governor of a state with 40,000 Holocaust survivors and the largest Jewish population outside of Israel, I take this hatred personally because I feel wounded as a human being to know that someone else is harmed in our state. And I'll continue to fight back with the full force of our government, not just to combat it and talk about it, but to criminalize it, prosecute the perpetrators, and stop it in its tracks. And it was in this very space last October we announced $43 million in critical infrastructure funding. I'm not talking about building roads and bridges. I'm talking about building security, security in our vulnerable institutions. Again, the yeshivas, the synagogues, places people gather, to places that are most risk of hate crime attacks based on what we've seen already. And we also allocated $25 million specifically to boost safety, security, and cameras and other ways we can protect. We're also strengthening the laws that are on the books against those who commit heinous crimes to be more accountable. That is something we did when we addressed the bail reform of the bail reform in our last budget, because hate crimes had been swept out of the crimes covered that would be bail eligible. And I said, that cannot be. At a time when we're seeing an escalation in hate crimes, how can we say that someone who perpetrates one would simply get an appearance ticket and be able to go back until their court date so they can go do it again and again and again? We stopped that with changes in the law that went into effect on May 9th following the passage of our budget. We also, in our budget, increased the reimbursement cap for victims to repair or replace essential property lost as a result of a crime from $500 to $2,500. And as I mentioned, the influence of the Buffalo shooting, I announced an executive order. I issued an executive order that directed every single community, every county in the state of New York, to develop plans to identify and confront the threats of domestic terrorism, including those that are ethnically, religiously, or racially motivated. I directed the head of Homeland Security, Commissioner Jackie Bray, who's doing an extraordinary job. I was just with her speaking to firefighters in neighboring Westchester County an hour ago. She's extraordinary. And yesterday, Jackie and I were on a training session for all these local partners as we talked about how they should stand up threat assessment teams and management of those. So we're putting $10 million out to local communities so they can be the eyes and ears on the ground to help us thwart white supremacy and domestic terrorism. Because it's not a slogan. The reality is there is no place for hate in our state, especially anti-Semitism or hate of any kind. And when it starts here, we all have a role to play in eradicating it. And we mentioned the Holocaust a number of times, and I can't wait to hear your remarks, Cecilia. I'm really looking forward to your words. But during World War II, New York was the home of the only Holocaust refugee shelter in the country. Now, you have to ask how that happened. The news was out there. Elise and Bruce and I were looking at some of the exhibits, and it talked about all the news was starting to come out of Europe. 1 million Jews massacred. Page 7 of the New York Times, not even the front page. London Times, page 16. This was going on. And the world, especially our own country, failed in its obligation to embrace people who were in need. Just like today we're embracing immigrants, migrants in search of a home coming up on buses as we speak. It's who we are as New Yorkers. But I did go to that one place in the country, Fort Ontario in Oswego. Patty Kenner made sure I go there. Is Patty Kenner in the room? Patty Kenner made sure I went there. And to showcase what a community with heart can do. And they embraced almost 1,000 refugees who were brought here from 1944 till 1946. And I had a chance to talk to people who lived among them. And it was an extraordinary experience. But what that did was say to us that we are the place you come to. We will take care of you. That's who we are. And so we're going to continue standing with our Jewish brothers and sisters because we know what happens when people turn a blind eye, when people ignore the facts, as happened back in the 1940s. Fast forward to today. What are we seeing out there? We're seeing too many disturbing signs. And I'll never forget when I had a chance to sit down with 10 women Holocaust survivors. And one of them said to me, unsolicited, she says, I'm watching the news. I'm getting scared. It feels like what happened when I was a little girl, starting again. I said, what do? You hug someone, almost 100 years old, saying, I'm seeing it happening again. In the United States of America. This is not Nazi Germany, it's the United States of America. I don't want the citizens of my state to live in fear ever. Ever. So we will take action in any way, any form, and be tough about it. And be as tough as we need to be. To say, you cannot do this in my state, in our state. And if you have hateful feelings and you can't deal with it, well, go somewhere else. Because we're not going to let you harm people in our state. So never forget is more than a slogan. It's what we preach. But I want to make sure, is it really being taught? Is it really being taught? For almost 30 years, 1994, we've had a law that mandated the Holocaust be taught in our schools. It's great. I don't remember being taught it. I don't know that my kids remember being taught it. And I asked this question a couple of days ago, well, what does teaching it mean? That there's a sentence in a history book when you're learning about World War II and they mention it? Or is it really taught? Is it just a statistic and a couple of 6 million? Or do you really tell the true story behind it? How people turned on their neighbors and became so radicalized. And they didn't have the internet to do that for them. That's why today is even more dangerous. You know, the mass spread of this is what we've been watching. And I asked the Attorney General after the Buffalo shooting to stand up an outfit that would be helping the state police watch for the signs that are out there. Because they're doing it, not in plain sight, but one level below, those dark websites, and we're on to that. But we're teaching this in schools, supposedly, but how is that in 2020, 58% of young New Yorkers can't name a single concentration camp? 60% were unaware that 6 million Jews were murdered during the Holocaust. Doesn't seem like it's sunk in very well, does it? And we're not an outlier. New York's not an outlier. All across the country, Holocaust understanding and knowledge is pitifully low. And at the same time, fascism's on the rise, anti-Semitism's on the rise, and I'm just saying there might be a correlation. We need to teach people when they're still young, because we cannot have these horrors repeated. And I don't think any babies are born with their kind of hate in their heart. I think about babies a lot. I have a 3-month-old grandbaby now. Had a chance to hold her over the weekend, and I look in her face, and I was like, she doesn't know hate. She doesn't know hate. And she can live an entire life of never knowing hate if she's not around forces that teach that to her. Or that you have an education system that'll fight back and give the true facts. And so that's why in a couple of minutes I'll be signing a bill that directs the Commissioner of Education to survey our school districts. Ask the question, what are you really doing? How much are you sharing? What grades? How much? How is the testing going? Are you sure this is penetrating the minds of our young people? Because that is our best hope, to stop the radicalization or the penetration of their hearts with hate that they may be seeing out there from other sources. And it's not always from the parents. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. I don't suspect it always is. But their access to the internet, where they can go to those sites. And also what we've identified is, I spent a lot of time with law enforcement, identifying the fact that social media platforms will push out more content the more you seek it. What I'm saying is they have algorithms, and this is what we're working on, trying to get around some federal laws that tie my hands on dealing with social media, but we're working on it. That when someone goes to see the Christ King massacre or the Tree of Life massacre, they see this online, they get the knowledge of that, and they start embracing the radicalization behind it, the algorithm of that social media site will push out even more content, push out more. So this is set up to really allow for the radicalization of people. That can't be the case. So I'm going to make sure, for starts, that our schools are properly teaching about the Holocaust as required by law, and to establish plans to deliver these required lessons that may not be taught. And I want to thank Senator Anna Kaplan and Assemblymember Nili Rozic for having the foresight to say, what is being taught, is it enough, and let's survey it and find out. Let's give them a round of applause for their efforts. We'll make sure all the school districts are compliant. Also, I have 2 more bills I'll be signing today to help us never forget. One is that the crimes committed during the Holocaust and survivors who are still with us today. One is making sure that museums, New York museums, now think about this, that they have to prominently post along the side of artworks that were stolen during the Nazi era in Europe. They have to give credit. They didn't go buy these somewhere. These were stolen. They're stolen from people who are the rightful owners during this reign of terror. So let's make this will be part of another way to involve Holocaust education in everyday lives. When someone goes to a museum and they see that sign, they might make them step back and think, wow, this was actually stolen. How did that happen? Let them ask those questions. So I want to thank Senator Anna Kaplan once again, and Assemblymember Chuck Levine for their leadership on this legislation. Let's give them a round of applause. Because studies estimate over 600,000 paintings were stolen during the Holocaust from Jewish owners in Europe. And that's over 20% of the art in Europe at the time. So many of them have been identified. Some are still missing, but we're going to make sure that that is not forgotten. And I want to thank you for that. Also, we have to recommit ourselves to the survivors. We need to do more. And I was at a luncheon with Kathy Kenner. We listened to the voices of Holocaust survivors, and I was struck by a statistic. This was a number of years ago. 40% of New York Holocaust survivors live in poverty. That is shocking. That is shocking. After what they've been through as children, losing family members, their lives are just turned upside down from the very beginning when they should be living a time of innocence. And they end up the other end of their life. They're comfortable, they're living with other friends and socializing, or are they having to worry about getting food on their table and can they afford their medicine? A civilized society, or at least a civilized state like New York, won't let that happen any longer. I announced money for Holocaust survivors, distributed to almost $3 million to be distributed to organizations when I was at the Waive Borough Park. And that's critical social services for our providers. And that's the day when I mentioned I just had a chance to sit down and listen to these survivors. And one of them did tell me, I'll never forget it, she said, I feel like my whole childhood was stolen from me. We all look back, we think about our children, our own childhoods, the memories that are part of who we are. When your memories, when you're 80, 90, 100 years old, or a stolen childhood, you don't even know what you missed. It's the cruelty never stops. The cruelty of that experience never seems to end. So it's our duty to protect these people. It truly is, and ensure that their later lives are nothing like their early lives. And we're taking another step. We're signing a bill that codifies the Department of Financial Services practice And I want to recognize our superintendent, Adrienne Harris. Give her a round of applause. She's doing a great job. Superintendent of Financial Services. Let's publicize the New York banks that'll waive the fees associated with Holocaust reparation payments. And I want to thank Senator Zellner Myrie for his leadership on this, and Member of Assembly Simcha Eichenstein. I want to thank both of you for seeing an issue here, that there are some banks doing the right thing, let people know who they are, and the rest of you, you better catch up. That's all I can say. So survivors in their area should not have to be paying processing fees and wire transfer fees for all the money that they're owed. And we know which banks are out there making sure that they don't have to, the banks will not be profiting off the pain of these individuals. Let's just get that out there. So I am so grateful to all the educators who will be helping us on this journey in schools, also the advocates who get to bring ideas to us, the legislators who really just don't stop until we continue in our pursuit to righting a horrific wrong of the past. We'll never fully achieve that. It's not possible. But I will know that every day we're going to make a difference. And I just want to say to the 1.77 Jews who call New York home, thank you for calling New York home. Don't go anywhere else. There's no better state. Florida's overrated. I shouldn't say this, but look at the governor. I mean, just start at the top down. Get in trouble. Got to stay on script. Got to stay. But I will tell you, as long as I'm your governor, as long as I have a breath in my body, I will stand to protect this community and honor the story and the people that had to endure the Holocaust. And with that, I want to bring up one of those survivors who used her life experience to help make sure that no one else has to endure the unthinkable. Cecilia Kenner was born in Poland in 1935. It's the year before my dad was born. My dad's still doing well. That's right. She was just a little girl when Germans invaded in 1941, and her father was drafted by the Russian army. The rest of the family had to live in a ghetto. And your mother was sent to a labor camp, and your mom promised you to a Catholic couple, I understand, because she didn't think you'd survive. But amazingly, you were reunited with your mom after the Russians liberated the family. And then your father escaped. It was what a story. I'll let you tell your story. But you came here in 1949, and you've been with us ever since. Not just living here, but finding a way to use your experience and sharing it with countless others. So today she's a volunteer with the Speakers Bureau of the Museum of Jewish History, giving her time, her story to others. And with that, it is my sincere privilege to introduce Cecilia Kenner.
Good morning to all of you. I am honored and blessed to be here, and indeed, my experiences during the war have hopefully helped children who listen to my story and then go back to their families, and the families negate everything that they heard or believed what I said. So, thank you so much, Governor Hochul, for all you are doing. It's helping to the students whose parents negate it, who don't know anything about it, as long as I can. And going forward, they will tell the story. So, in 2020, a survey was done by the Conference on Jewish Material Claims against Germans, and they found that New Yorkers aged 18 to 30 that nearly a third of them believed that the Holocaust is a myth. So, I stand here today to say I am not a myth. I was born in Lviv. It was Lvov, and it was Poland then. It's Ukraine now. My parents, Morris and Sonia Rapp, my maiden name, survived as well. I am not going to go into the story, but they are not a myth. I was thrown into a truck and pulled away from my friends, separated from my family, forced into a ghetto. That is not a myth. I was hidden in a Christian family home, then a barn, with only my Polish mother knowing about my being in the barn. She risked her life and the life of her family to save me. Approximately maybe like 18 months, miraculously, I was reunited with my family once again, not a myth. I recently gave a talk to a high school class, and as I have done for the past 20 or so years here through the museum, schools and classrooms throughout New York and Florida, so I gave this class, and one of the lectures program, a young man came up to me and he said, "Oh my God, really, this is what happened to you? But Celia, can I touch you? Yeah, I'm real, I'm a human being like you. But guess what, Celia? When I go home and I tell my parents about what you told me and what I should learn, they would not believe me. Truly, they will negate every word I say." So anti-Semitism and hatred did not start in Germany in the 1930s any more than it ended after World War II, as the governor just said. It is a moral imperative that we teach what happened to me, to my family, to my people, and let it stand as a living memorial for all of us. This magnificent institution, this beautiful museum of Jewish heritage that we are gathered here today, offering dynamic and in-person and online a Holocaust curriculum for educators and students to learn and experience what really happened. That young man that was telling his parents, and they negated him, he needs us. All the students need us to help them learn and tell what really happened. The consequences of not knowing are truly tragic. I would like to very much thank you, Governor Hochul, and all the leaders and educators that have done so much to ensure that I did not become a myth. Thank you so much, Governor, for all you do.
Please welcome Senator Anna Kaplan.
Good morning, everybody. I want to first start by thanking Celia for sharing her story with all of us. When we talk about Holocaust, we say never forget. But in order to forget something, you need to learn about it in the first place. And the statistics show that we are not doing a very good job of teaching our kids about the atrocious of Holocaust and the 6 million Jews who were murdered by the Nazis. A recent study by the Conference on Jewish Material Claims against Germany laid out shocking statistics that exemplifies the problem. Among millennials in New York, 58% can't name a single concentration camp. 19% believe that Jews caused Holocaust. And 28% believe that Holocaust is a myth or a story that has been exaggerated. Learning the lessons of Holocaust is more important today than ever before. And it's taken on a new urgency in recent months as we've all watched in horror when a peaceful European nation was invaded on their false premises, and cynically using Holocaust misinformation as an excuse to do so. It is critical that we all know our history and that we teach our next generation about it, no matter how dark or difficult the conversation might be. That's why I fought so hard to pass the Holocaust Education Bill, which will ensure that every single child in New York receives a meaningful education on the Holocaust. Because at a time when hatred and anti-Semitism are exploding around the world and in our own community, we must do everything that we can to ensure that we learn the lesson of history so that we aren't doomed to repeat it. So today, as the bill is finally signed into law, I want to thank my partner, Neely, Assemblywoman, for helping me to get this through the finish line. I also want to thank all the organizations who fought by our side for this legislation. And of course, a big thank you to our Governor, Kathy Hochul, for signing it into law without a delay and for always standing up to hate and anti-Semitism in our community. Thank you.
Please welcome Assemblymember Neely Rosick.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I'm a little taller than Senator Kaplan. First and foremost, I want to say thank you to Governor Hochul for your unwavering support for the Jewish community in New York. Let's give her a huge round of applause. This is a big day for the Jewish community, regardless of how you identify or where you fit on the spectrum, and we recognize that and so appreciate that in you. I'm the daughter of a Jewish Holocaust educator. She's here today, so I just want to shout out to my mom very quickly. But she taught me all of the lessons of the Holocaust. 89 years ago, the Holocaust, the systematic persecution and murder of 6 million Jews began. She taught me that 77 years ago, Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest Nazi death camp, was liberated, signifying the end of the Holocaust. And 28 years ago, in 1994, New York created a curriculum requiring that we teach students about the atrocities of the Holocaust. The law intended to ensure students learned about the genocide of 6 million Jews and millions of other minority groups, including the disabled and members of the LGBTQIA community. To teach all New York students what happens when anti-Semitism, racism, hate, xenophobia go unchecked. But as legislators, we know that no law is perfect. So 28 years later, we're here today to give this effort new life. The legislation which we talked about will audit schools to ensure that they are in compliance with the curriculum requirements. It'll provide schools a pathway to remedy shortcomings and will provide all of us at all levels of government with a report on the findings so we can continue to improve the education New York students deserve. It was a seemingly simple and straightforward bill, but we had a long road to get here, and I want to thank Senator Kaplan for being lockstep every single step of the way. I first authored this in 2017 after the Pew Research Center study found glaring Holocaust ignorance amongst my generation, millennials. And then it was corroborated in later studies, which many have mentioned, and I won't go into the alarming statistics again. Because these studies show what we already know. Anti-Semitism still exists today and is actively on the rise. We saw it in Colleyville, Texas, in Pittsburgh. We saw it in Jersey City, and right here in New York, in Muncie. And then there are the other forms of anti-Semitism that Governor Hochul talked about, like harassment, threats, and most importantly, Holocaust distortion and denial that don't often make the headlines, but constitute the day-to-day experiences of many of my friends, of many Jewish New Yorkers. We can't expect it to stop if we aren't properly teaching the lessons of the largest instance of state-sanctioned hatred and anti-Semitism to all of our students. And I traveled all across the state, from Buffalo to Albany to New York City to Long Island, talking to educators, seeing what gaps there were in the curriculum. We cannot let the normalization of anti-Semitism happen, and this is the big first step in doing that. I'm grateful to everyone who spent the time and energy organizing, meeting, calling, emailing to get this bill done. You all know who you are. I'm not going to mention them because you only get into trouble. But mostly to my colleagues and partners in government who stood by us and did the right thing when it was really hard. And to the governor for signing this incredible package. It's incredibly meaningful today. I'm hopeful that this legislation will go a long way to increase awareness about the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, hatred, and above all else, that we value life. Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you.
Please welcome Assembly Member Charles Levine.
I am grateful to be here today and grateful that Governor Hochul is going to be signing these critical pieces of legislation. And at a time of growing hatred. And I don't want to state the obvious, but it seems that in 2016, a Pandora's jar full of racial prejudice, full of basic hatred, was opened. What we do today is to try to put a lid on that Pandora's jar of intolerance and hatred, cruelty and brutality. So the bill that Senator Kaplan and I sponsored, and that I'm so grateful, as are we, that Governor Hochul will be signing into law today, is very straightforward. museums displaying art stolen by the Nazi and his collaborators and his allies must be displayed along with a placard acknowledging that cruel fact. Very simple, very, very straightforward, but not so simple, because this serves as a reminder and a notice to anyone viewing those works of art, which, by the way, the author Mary Lane has referred to and called in her brilliant book, Hitler's Last Hostages. So anyone now viewing Hitler's Last Hostages has to contend with and confront the fact that their heritage is a heritage of hatred and death. Our heritage as New Yorkers and as Americans is to make our union, as the founders wanted, a more perfect place. And the way we do that is by standing together, standing arm in arm and making sure that we do not tolerate anyone being discriminated against. That's our history. Now, some states are trying to erase history, and you all know which states I'm talking about. We cannot create a more perfect union. We cannot make the future safer for our children and our grandchildren unless we know what reality is. And what we are doing here today is going to help us and everyone else, not only in New York, but throughout the entire nation, recognize what reality is. We stand together. Now, my friend Neely Rosick, in closing, said these words, Am Yisrael Chai, which means the people of Israel live. Now, interestingly enough, I thought that that's an expression that's been around for hundreds of years. But a minor piece of research on my part reveals that the first time anyone used that phrase, those words, was when the BBC recorded Holocaust survivors at the end of the Second World War. So, how profound, how significant is what Governor Hochul is doing here today and what we are all doing here today? And this is how profound. For America to survive, Am Yisrael Chai. And for America to survive, we can all say, Am America Chai. So, Governor Hochul, in the languages I learned as a child, to begin with, thank you, Ashena Dank, and Toda Rabbah. And thank you all for letting me share my thoughts.
Please welcome Senator Zelnor Myrie.
Good morning. Good morning. All right, just doing a vibe check in the room. Let me first thank the governor for signing these important bills into law today. I want to thank my partner in the Assembly, Simcha Eichenstein, for getting across the finish line in the Assembly. And let me thank our superintendent for her policy that was instituted last year, the same policy that we wrote this bill on. Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof. One of my favorite passages from the Torah, which means justice, justice shall you pursue. Now, there is debate on why they say justice 2 times. Some have said that it is simply meant to underscore the importance of the pursuit of justice. And others have said it's meant to encourage us to look at all sides of a particular issue and try to get justice there. Now, I have the honor of representing some of the most prominent rabbis on the planet, so I'm publicly asking for their permission for me to offer what the repetition means to me. And it means that justice is not just one thing, but that it can be many. That sometimes justice is a big, sweeping change, and sometimes it is a small act. And this bill, transparency, encouragement of banks to waive the fees for the individuals who are living in poverty and who have survived one of the worst tragedies in human history. It is a small act, but it is a just act. And so I am proud to have authored this small, just act. I am grateful to the governor for signing this into law and advancing it. And I'm proud to be in a room with all of you today as we celebrate a historic step forward for our survivors that need it the most. Thank you.
Please welcome Assembly Member Simcha Eichenstein.
Good morning, Governor, colleagues, friends. It's appropriate that the governor has chosen to sign these three bills this week. Just a few days ago, the Jewish people observed the fast of Tisha B'Av, when we mourn the destruction of the temple over 2,000 years ago. On this day, we also reflect upon tragedies that have occurred over the centuries, most notably among them, the Holocaust. We must remember that the most heinous evil in history of mankind was perpetrated 80 years ago. And we must ensure our young people learn it and understand it. As a grandchild of 4 Holocaust survivors, I was fortunate to have heard firsthand stories of what they endured. Yet many younger generations lack basic knowledge of the Holocaust. I am honored to represent a district with the largest number of Holocaust survivors anywhere in the United States. They are absolutely my biggest heroes. They have lived through unspeakable horror, but instead of succumbing to grief and sadness, they rose from the ashes. They rebuilt, started new lives, new families, rebuilt communities, and they held on to their faith. Now it is our obligation to do whatever we can to protect them, to honor them, and to ensure their well-being. It's the least we can do. So that's why this bill that I sponsor with my colleague, Senator Waive, and signed into law shortly by the governor, is so significant. Thank you, Governor Hochul, for recognizing the importance of this bill. Unfortunately, as the governor just mentioned, 40% of Holocaust survivors are living in poverty, and their main source of income is their reparation payments. When banks charge transaction fees, it may seem as insignificant to us, but it can add up to a substantial amount, especially for those that are reliant on these funds to pay for their groceries, their rents, and their daily needs. That is why it's important for the Department of Financial Services to publish and annually update a list of which banks have agreed to waive these fees and which banks haven't. And I want to commend the department for their willingness to do so, and I personally want to thank Superintendent Harris, who is here with us today. This simple and sensible legislation will ensure that thousands of Holocaust survivors are able to receive their rightful payments without getting hit with corporate transaction fees. So thank you, Governor Hochul, Senator Waive, and to all my colleagues for supporting this legislation.